Julian.
Hello.
So you're the founder of Wisdolia, which is an AI-generated flashcards app that recently started to pick up some traction on TikTok, and it's a Founders Inc. company. But when we met, I think a year and a half ago, you were working on something completely different.
Yeah, that's right. Before Wisdolia, which we launched almost a year ago, we spent a whole year going through like 4 pivots, a lot of iterations. It took a while to find something that has had decent traction, and we almost ran out of money and died before getting there. So yeah, which is natural. It's a part of the journey.
So I want to work backwards. So I guess we'll start off with the last few months where you guys started to see traction. You know, f.inc came in with the check, I think 3 or 4 months ago now.
Right.
What was the turning point where your startup that was almost dying suddenly, you know, kind of had this random, seemingly to me, random like burst of success? And, you know, you made your tweet last week that went kind of viral about how you guys are generating like $300K a year now. Yeah,
exactly. The turning point. Well, I think it's, you know, startups are something that are so hard that it's almost like it requires so many mistakes to get to a point where you actually start to go down a path that makes sense, or maybe not go down a path that makes sense, but develop a process and a mode of thinking that allows you to operate much more intelligently. And I'd say perhaps the biggest turning point in our philosophy that eventually led to discovering Wisdolia is that instead of like committing really hard to ideas we felt really strongly about, we decided to like almost not really having a choice, because by the time we scrapped the last idea, which was Mindflow, a social app, we spent 6 months developing and spent like over $100,000, which and ended up with almost no traction. We had like 3 to 4 months of runway left, and we're like, even if we wanted to, we can't afford to like go another 6 months on one idea if it doesn't work. So it's like we need to spend like 1 to 2 week cycles, like really going hard on testing, like identifying what are the riskiest hypotheses around an idea that we want to test, and how do we invalidate or validate the riskiest hypotheses around an idea within a week or 2. And if we think we cannot validate or invalidate the riskiest things within a week or 2, we shouldn't even try the idea.
What would validation or invalidation look like though? Like, how do you know that something is worth working on?
I think there's a lot of factors to it. There's both like just like what is the external validation or market. In our case for this, we got kind of lucky in that what gave birth to Wisdolia, the specific idea behind it, was that someone put out a tweet, Julia Wu, saying, my dream AI product would be to turn everything I'm reading and learning into AI-generated flashcards so I could reflect on it more easily. That tweet blew up, got over 2.5K likes, 300K views. And David and I, who were my co-founder, we were looking for an idea that, you know, we were excited about. We loved education, had been building it for a couple of years now. And so the market validation around it is like, wow, we've been given a gift here. If we can actually execute well on this, there's like pretty good initial validation that helps a lot. So that's the external side. Then of course there's the internal, like how do you actually build or experiment or talk to users to try to get signal on what matters the most about your idea early on. And I can expand there if you'd like.
Yeah. So I think one thing that's interesting is that feels very repeatable. Like there's always, you know, every week there's a new tweet of like, my dream AI product is that, you know, goes viral. And it feels like if someone is in a position where they don't know what to work on next, or they're in a similar boat where their startup is about to die, they can kind of just sit on Twitter and wait for people to tell them what they want. Then how did you go from, you know, this tweet that got a bunch of likes to then validating that it was something to work on? Because ideas that sound good are very different than ideas that people would pay for.
Yeah, it's very true. And I would pretext this by saying that ideas can really come from anywhere. You just have to be very open to identifying the opportunities that are right in front of us, right? There's so many opportunities in front of us that we often don't see. And I think like when we saw that idea, it wasn't just that the tweet went viral. It was the fact that David and I had already been building in this space for a couple of years, and we really liked it. Before that, we started to explore AI-related ideas. So we were already thinking a lot about AI. And David and I, like, we really love building like learning tools and personal growth tools. And when we first like started dabbling with AI, we were like, whoa, this is like a paradigm shift in what's like possible to solve so many of the problems that have existed in education or learning with AI. So we're very super like interested in the space, had already been building with it. AI was a game changer. And the specific idea just had enough initial validation to the point where like this can be a really good starting point for us. And we'd see the potential to expand beyond this initial idea of like AI generated flashcards.
And then how did the TikTok kind of like push come about?
Yeah, so we launched the product shortly after. The first like 100 users, we kind of like reached out to them on Twitter manually.
Who were you reaching out to?
I was reaching out to people that had engaged with the tweet. Smart. So not only was it initial validation, it was also like, hey, these people have shown interest. Let's reach out to them. I reached out to a ton of them. It led to a lot of good early feedback. Our first 100 users came from here. I also got my Twitter account banned because I sent too many DMs, but...
You got banned?
Yeah. So really? I have to make a new one. I appealed it like 4 times, never worked out, but anyways, it's fine. It happens. part of the journey. And our first 1,000 users, we got it because we put our tool on an AI tool directory, Futurepedia. There's many of these. So if you're building an AI and the benefit of the hype is like double-edged sword, but part of the benefit in it is that people are interested. So these AI tool directories spurred up. That helped us get our first 1,000 users and organic content. But then, yeah, like after a couple months of building, iterating, what really helped us get a sort of 10x increase and virality was influencer marketing. So that was the big turning point in a way. And even before this, I think an important part that we figured out that really helped with influencer marketing down the line was we first made this like flashcards app, and initially we wanted to make it for lifelong learners, people like David and I, because it's like we want to build a product for ourselves, right? But very quickly we started to realize like, oh wait, this is probably better for students. But we're like, but students may not always want to learn, and the school system's kind of broken. So it was kind of like an internal debate of whether we should focus on students or not. But I think this was a really important part in our story of being mature enough to realize that we have to put our own like desires and like wishes apart and really focus on like who needs this the most and who is like most willing to pay as well. So we started generally with students, but in our onboarding, we asked, what type of student are you? Are you a high school, undergrad, master's, PhD, medical, law, or something else? And by knowing who our users were and how they engaged with the app and which converted from free to paid, we ended up noticing that medical students in specific were 7 times more likely to convert from free to paid than the average student. And they used it 3 times more than the average student. So what did this mean? Now, whenever we started to explore distribution channels like TikTok, we knew that if we targeted med students specifically, our CAC to LTV or our CAC to average order value of initial purchase, that ratio was going to be optimal for med students because we knew that they were the most likely to convert.
So I think one thing that's really cool about that is I see similarities in kind of how things unfolded with Ultra. Furkan put out a tweet. Ultra is our email product that we're building in the studio. Furkan put out a tweet saying like, can you believe that email hasn't been reinvented in like, decades, building a new app, AI meets email, whatever. I put out a tweet saying I just deleted my Superhuman subscription. At that point, I did actually cancel my Superhuman subscription, but the app was barely usable. But I was like, okay, I'll cancel it. I'll go all in on Ultra. And we got a bunch of replies because of, we added the @reply if you want to try it out. And we did the same thing. We got like, I think something like, 50 to 100 replies on the tweet. And we just went in and we manually DM'd everyone. And that's how we got our first 100 users. After that, it was a question of how can we dump in as many people into like the top of our funnel so that we can then look in post-hog and see, these are the types of users that are most likely to convert from our landing page to the product to turning into a user that recurs on the second week or.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's a good process. And I was thinking about this earlier today, like what are the sort of core steps that we've taken along the journey? And I think the first is like initial validation. Like, do people actually want this? Like, get your first 100 users. Yeah. What feedback are you getting? How hard was it to get those first 100 users? The more friction, and actually one of the best pieces of advice we've gotten along our journey came from Uber. He told us that when we first launch. All right, you launch it, spend the next 2 weeks only on marketing. Don't do anything else, because this will help you, one, get users and validate, get initial signal. But also, if you spend like 2 full weeks only on marketing and distribution and like no one's coming to the app or staying, you should probably try something else, right? Like if you spend so much effort on like marketing and nothing's really clicking, that's not good. But anyways, if you get past that initial first step of like the first 100 users, I think like the big next step there is, if it makes sense, like start to monetize, because one of the riskiest assumptions, one of the riskiest hypotheses, as I alluded to earlier, is, are people willing to pay? If they are, how much and who is most willing to pay? Because paying indicates how deep the pain is, right? So that's step 2. And then I'd say the third next step is what you're mentioning here, is how do you get to a point where you have consistently healthy top of funnel, right? How do we get in 100, 500, or 1,000 new people into the door every day? Because if we have that, that is like the fundamental ground layer that you need to start experimenting like crazy. If you don't have enough top of funnel growth, then you won't have enough data to run experiments on your funnel, on viral growth loops, on retention, on all these things. Like, so you can't really make significant product improvements that make sense and are data driven until you have your top of funnel figured out.
So now you're at a point in the story where you figured out that that med school students were the most likely to actually be your target customer or ideal customer that would actually pay money for the product. How did you then go after them?
Yeah, so the core thing we started trying to do is influencer marketing, and primarily on TikTok. And this is where you have to figure out like an experiment, like what channels work best. For example, Alex from Leap, who you just talked to, Twitter worked best for him. Why? Because Twitter is full of like tech people, engineers, startups, et cetera. It works really well for him. For us, med students don't really use Twitter that much, so it's not like a great channel for us. But they actually, a decent amount of them are on TikTok. So that's where we went. So first is the channel. Then the second one is like the approach. Well, obviously, if we know med students are best, let's go and find med student influencers, because they're obviously going to be the ones with the audiences that have the most med students with them.
I think one thing that we found that was pretty tricky with one of our consumer social products was when we reached out to these influencers, a lot of them just wouldn't reply.
Yeah.
And I think that's because they have so many people in their DMs all the time, either asking to work together or just like, like fans. How did you start the process of working with these specific influencers? I guess it might've been easier for you guys too, because it was med school students instead of just like your typical like guy from the Midwest.
Yeah, definitely. Honestly, we didn't really experience that much friction, and our conversion rates with reaching out have been pretty good. And I think that's a testament of the product being really good and being really targeted to like the target demographic. So that's why like if you're like reaching out to a lot of influencers and you're not getting good conversion, that could be signal that you maybe don't have the target market right. Because just think about it. If you're an influencer, yeah, you want to make money and advertise, but you also want to advertise things that are going to be super valuable for your audience. And if you see a product like, I don't see how this could be valuable for my audience, even if there's money involved, you've built trust. That's why influencer marketing is so valuable, because you're buying trust. So if you think you would lose trust by advertising a product that's not valuable to them, they may not want to do it. So I think that's like, you should reverse engineer it if you're not getting good conversion.
I remember I saw there was a supplements company, I forget what it was called or which one it was, but they put out, there was a study, or like one of their founders was on a podcast, and he talked about how once they worked with Andrew Huberman, their customer size shot up by like 100% or some crazy number. Just because Andrew Huberman has built such a deep like trust with his audience, and they look at him as an authority figure in the space, where it's like, if he's pushing something, it's probably good for me because I've learned other things from him that turned out to be good for me.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, and you can imagine that Huberman, Tim Ferriss, these like big people, they know this. They know their audiences trust them so much. And if they advertise a product that the audience is like, oh, this must be great, let me go buy it, and then the product ends up not being great or has some like health problems, that in the case of Huberman's example, then they're gonna be like, what the hell, Huberman? I thought I could trust you. And then boom, you lose trust. So yeah, you have to advertise products that align.
How long ago did the med school TikTok or influencer stuff start working?
It started working, I think it was 3 or 4 months ago, when we had the first like big viral video that, like 10x'd our weekly revenue that week, and ended up generating us like 15 to 20K in revenue for like one video.
But I remember when we were talking about it earlier, you were saying that it actually started to taper off. Like,
yeah. So it's interesting. I mean, I think a good way to think of influencer marketing is kind of like startups, right? Like you're kind of like most aren't going to work. Most videos aren't going to work. So you're kind of like trying to maximize your bets in hopes that one or some go viral. And so what happened is we did get a few viral videos, but they were primarily coming from this one girl. And so because it was working, we increased our budget the next month. And only the same girl like went viral. We increased it even more the following month. I think spent like 15K or something on
15K.
influencer marketing, and still like no viral videos. So it's hard. It's hard to know exactly how to read into that as well. Like, okay, do we keep on taking shots on goal and hope it ends up working, or like, is this channel not as good as we thought? Or should we go back and focus more on the product for some time and then come back to influencer marketing? It's a big open question, but yeah, it's a hard thing to like get consistently right.
how big was the audience of the girl whose content was working for you?
When we started working with her, she had around 100K. She now has like 160K followers.
So she wasn't like on TikTok relatively. She wasn't like a huge major, like actually, like it was more of like a micro influencer kind of.
Yeah, but like we paid her an initial deal for 3 videos, which by the way, if you feel pretty bullish on someone and their quality of content, you can usually do a multi-video deal to get like better like cost per video sort of pricing. But yeah, with her, yeah, the first video got like 1 million views. The second one I think got like 300,000, and the third like 800,000.
And how much did you pay for each of them?
It was around $600 each.
That's not bad.
Yeah. So it was like more than like 20, 30x return.
Yeah, I'm starting to see a theme, and Alex kind of talked about this on the last episode too, but it's like everything works from a marketing perspective. It's mostly about where can you get the most value for your money based on like what you have in your network or what resources you have.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I listened to the podcast, and I think it's a really good point because, and especially the point on like your resources, like what are you guys like best at, right? Like what are your strengths? How can you best leverage that? And like one caveat I'd mention, for example, is my co-founder David and I focus on like the tech side, right? I was an engineer before. David focuses on design, product. Those are like his core strengths. And so we have like a gap in expertise around distribution. Like we've gotten much better at it over time, but it's not like our strength. And also it's not just like we've gotten like good at it, but also because we're so good at these other things, if we focus on like growth, which isn't our core strength, and it's also like the opportunity cost of like, oh, well, that means I'm not coding or David's not designing or doing product work. So ideally, you have someone that can fill that gap and dedicate themselves fully to it. We've done at least decently well in doing that as like a side thing that obviously is important to invest time into. But I think it's like, everything works, but like, who's your team? What are your strengths? Or how can you like complement those? Or how do you determine priorities based on those things as well?
You know, I feel like there's something to be said about when you have a small team, there almost always feels like there's more, and you're strapped for capital. It almost feels like there's always more value in learning a skill yourself than bringing on an external person, and definitely more than hiring like an external agency.
Yeah.
Where it's like in the studio now, we've seen founders come in with engineering backgrounds and very little growth backgrounds. But then in just a year, like Alex is a good example of this, even like the Fluid team, they learn how to market themselves instead of just relying, specifically on like someone outside of their team. And that also influences how you build the product. If you're a video editor and you learn animation, that influences how you think about like the creative direction of a video altogether. And I think that people are now kind of like going to Upwork for everything. And I'm guilty of this too, where it's like, if I don't want to do something, I just look for someone on Upwork to do it for me. Whereas I think that there are much longer term gains in just spending the time slowing down for like a week or two and just adding on an extra thing to your kind of like skill set?
Yeah, actually, like we've worked with 2 marketing agencies, and I think even though it brought some good things and we learned throughout the process, I think it was a mistake to do both of them.
How much did you spend on them?
One was like $5K a month. This was for Mindflow, the previous idea, because we were building a social app. So we're like, yeah, we got to churn out a lot of content and grow. Don't build a social app.
Don't build a, that's a recurring theme on this pod now. Just don't build a social app.
Yeah, anyways. And then the other one was $4K a month, and it was a performance marketing agency. We actually just stopped working with them. But yeah, it was the same deal. It's kind of like, okay, David and I are super busy. Marketing isn't our strength. Let's hire someone that's really good. And we had this bet on performance marketing, which is basically just ads for the most part, that like, influencer marketing is great, but like you don't know what's going to work, and it's really hard to measure CACs. Whereas ads is like measurable. You can see it, and if it works, you just click a button and increase budget, and boom, you don't have to go reach out to like 1 million more people. So it's way more scalable, way more measurable.
But you're about to stop working with them?
But we're going to stop working with them. So it's not that we're not bullish on ads per se. Actually, we got like our Google ads to be like profitable, right? To have a CAC below our average order value and way above our LTV. Which
Can I ask what those numbers are?
Yeah, so our CAC with the Google ads, we have it at around like $25. Our average order value, which you're unfamiliar, average order value we think is very important. It's like basically like when someone makes their first purchase, first payment, what is the average value of that order, right? And this includes annual plans. Ours is $32 because 30 to 40% of people pay for an annual plan. And then LTV, of course, is $119. So yeah, a CAC that beats average order value is phenomenal, right? So CAC $25, average order value $32, LTV $119. Pretty good numbers overall. So we're like scaling Google ads, and that has gone pretty well. But the problem again is like, yeah, we didn't really know much about ads when we brought this agency. That's why we brought them. But throughout the 4 or 5 months we worked with them, because we didn't understand like ads super well, I think you run into this trap of like, you can't ask like great questions. The accountability is less. Also, they don't have as much context as you do. So they may not think of as good keywords to do on search, Google search ads, for example. So it's kind of like you have the benefit of context, and also you care infinitely more than anyone ever will about your business. So like, you know, an agency is like splitting their time between all these clients. If you're like, hey, increase the budget, they might take a day or two.
Especially with performance agencies, just because of the amount of money that's involved, unless you're paying like 10K a month on a retainer, it's either a bunch of VAs in like the Philippines running your ad accounts for you and you're just talking to like the face of the agency, or it's like some guy in the US that's managing like 60 different accounts. And I think because of that, we decided not to work with any ad agencies, and instead I would just get on calls with all of them. And like a lot of them are my friends. So I would just be able to like sit down and walk them through my dashboard, and they would kind of show me like, you know, you need to be using search instead of Performance Max, or, you know, with your meta ads, here's how you want to better split test campaigns, or, you know, you're not spending enough for you to be able to A/B test, you know, this many creatives. That was kind of like a huge fast track, instead of, you know, either one, spending a bunch of time onboarding an agency, spending a bunch of money working with them, or just two, like just starting myself from scratch and just watching YouTube videos and, you know, hoping that fills in all the knowledge that I need.
Yeah, exactly. And actually like, maybe the final thing that comes to mind here that's important is, what we're planning on doing now that we're not working with the agency. David, my co-founder, is taking lead on like managing the Google ads and whatnot. But I actually think the ideal balance for things that you don't understand well is, instead of hiring someone to do that thing, it's do it yourself, but find like a really good coach, right? Like someone you meet with once a week or once every 2 weeks. That way, because if you just go into it not knowing and then like not getting mentorship, you could also get lost. You could waste a lot of time. Yeah. And even though you save money, like time is also, of course, very valuable.
Especially with ads, you could waste a lot of money on ads that just are very clearly not done the right way.
Yeah, exactly. Like you're just, the thinking is always, how can you learn as fast as possible? If you hire an agency that delegates learning in a way, right? Like, oh, I don't need to learn this very much because they'll handle it. Yeah. If you do it yourself, like, oh shit, I have to learn everything. But it's much more effective to learn if you do the thing yourself and you have like a good mentor alongside with you that can like course correct and have like a tighter feedback loop from, you know, someone that's good at it. So, and it's like much less expensive if you're meeting with someone once every week as opposed to hiring like a whole agency.
And you know, the next thing that's interesting about Wisdolia right now is you guys had raised, I think, something like 400 or 500K, but you have a very small team.
Yeah.
You know, how do you think about who's working on what? How do you delegate between growth and engineering? How do you figure out what to work on every week?
Yeah, definitely. So at the core of it, we have David and I as the co-founders. I work on the technical part for the most part. Oh, and also we have 2 contract engineers as well. And these are both people, Juan and Leonard, they're exceptional. Really, really, really great engineers. But I say it's a good combination of really good engineers at a fairly like affordable like rate. So I think that's always like the ideal, but it's like very hard.
Where did you find them?
So with Juan, it was through a referral. Juan is Ecuadorian. He lived in Ecuador and he got a visa to come to the US, but he still doesn't know English very well. So he's a really good experienced engineer, but he's still learning English. So I speak Spanish, I'm Colombian. So it's kind of like leveraging that strength of I speak with him entirely in Spanish while he's still like learning English. But of course, without knowing English, it's like your value in the market is a lot lower. And then with Leonard's 18. He's in high school, which is crazy.
Is it the Leonard who was here for AISF?
That's right. Yeah, yeah.
Oh, I didn't know he worked at Wisdolia now.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so he works with us. He's really great. I mean, that's how we found him because he put in like the Founders Inc. Discord, like, yo,
That's so funny.
looking for something. So it's come like very casually.
Yeah.
Even now we might potentially hire like a head of growth that's like a friend of ours. So it's like we're not like actively hiring, but if there's like really good people that can make a substantial difference, like, you know, and we have the funds, and we'll definitely consider it. I focus on the technical side, mostly coding and managing the engineers and fundraising. And then David does almost everything else. Design, product. I help him think and collaborate on ideas and vision, but he leads most of the product decisions. David also leads marketing for the most part. I, of course, help too. But that's kind of how it's mostly split up amongst everyone.
What are some of the experiments you're running right now, product-wise?
Yeah, so I think experimentation is probably one of the most valuable, like no exaggeration, most valuable skill sets you can acquire and systems that you can develop for operating as a founder. And it applies to everything, right? You can run experiments on growth channels, distribution channels, as well as your product. And I like to break down the product into several different pillars that are important. One is your funnel, right? Like, what is your funnel? All the way from like when someone hits your landing page, all the way into like, you know, going to the actual app, like maybe having the first magic moment experience, signing up, and then, you know, retaining as well as converting to paid, right? What does that funnel look like? What are the percent dropouts at every point? The second is viral growth loops. And this is the thing we're most focused on right now. Viral growth loops is how do you get users to bring on more users onto the app, right? And Alex mentioned this because I was in the previous episode, Alex from Leap, because I was talking to him literally the day before about, if you get, he mentioned this, but it's worth iterating, repeating. If you get your referral rate to 1, which basically like one user, every user that comes refers someone new, is basically infinite growth, right? Even if that number is 0.8, like on average, a user refers 0.8, what happens if you bring 10 people, those 10 people will bring 8 people, those 8 will bring 6, 10 people leads to 31 new people. That means that for the price you pay to acquire 10, you get 31 for free.
So Wisdolia is primarily a desktop app. Mm-hmm. What are some of the things you do like actually tactically in the product to get people to refer their friends? Like on iOS apps, you do the typical like invite 5 contacts to skip the wait list, or TikTok went really viral by adding the little watermark in the bottom, the bottom third of their video, so that when people shared it on Instagram, you could see that it was from TikTok. What are you guys doing? Yeah,
so we're running a ton of experiments here, and the way we're kind of like breaking down how to come up with these experiments is thinking about when should we ask for a referral where should we ask the user to do a referral? How should we, and how should we do that, right? And so right now we're mostly experimenting with where, right? So we first started in like your first generation experience. You upload a document, you hit generate, and you get a set of questions. And we asked like, do you want to share this deck of cards with a friend? That was the first place. Now we're experimenting with putting it like somewhere in the flow of the experience, like after 3 cards, asking them to do it there. We also have one like a share link with friend, like in the header. So right now we're just trying to figure out like where can we put this that has best conversion. Maybe it's also in the sign up flow, like the last step in the sign up. That's where we're experimenting. The other question is like, how do you just say like, hey, share it with your friends, here's a link. Or do you maybe provide rewards, right? And rewards can come in 2 forms. Either you just give them money, or maybe you give them a discount on your premium, your like paid product subscription. Or you can even, I think a more creative approach is, what if you feature gate some things or limits if they refer? For example, on Wisdolia, you're limited to generating 15 sets of cards per month for free. What if we lowered that to 5, but every friend you refer and invite increases that limit by 3. So you go from like 5 to 8 to 11 to 12, right? So these are all experiments that we want to try running to see what ends up working best. And of course, other than that, it's social features, right? Right now, Wisdolia is a single player sort of experience. If we build more social features, does that add more value? Do people want that? And how might that affect referrals?
Dude, Quizlet got me through all of high school because it was like people would make the flashcards. I think I went through an online high school, and so the books we used were very standard, like across like the basic California public education. And so for every like homework assignment or for every, like test that was coming up, I could just go on Quizlet and I would see other people's like question answers that they had created. And I would put those into flashcards, and I would literally just, spaced repetition and just like go through everything until I like had a basic, like a pretty good idea of what would happen on the test the next day. And then I could go in, and usually I would end up with decent scores off of just other people's Quizlet flashcards.
Yeah, 100%. I think Quizlet got like the sharing done really well. The UX was like simple enough where it was like easy to use and like fun to share.
Is that something you're thinking about doing?
Yeah, for sure. Especially like, I think one thing they did really well as well is SEO, right? Like you can search up like...
You just copy paste a question and then the answer comes up and it's from Quizlet.
Exactly, yeah. So they have really good SEO. That's something that we definitely need to do better at. So yeah, I think there's a lot to learn there. But even beyond like the social features Quizlet has, it's kind of like, again, thinking from first principles, how do people today, especially med students, naturally interact or study together when and if they do? And what does that look like? Is there a potential to create a better experience there? Because you can do we'll do the basic things for sure that have a higher confidence interval. But there's the potential to innovate on social features as well for learning that we're curious about.
While we're talking about education, I think you had a very interesting kind of like college progression, everything from Tony Robbins in your freshman year to then, other things happened. How would you say your college experience led to you becoming a founder?
Yeah. Well, I went through the education system as we all do. I went to college as well, studied computer science at Texas A&M University. But I think like most people, I was very frustrated by my experience with the education system, right? Where it kind of like you're forced to like kind of like memorize things. You don't feel like as creative, as free. You want to work on your like own side projects, but like school can like take away time. Sometimes like you're learning something and you don't really know why you're learning this thing. You just like lack autonomy, creativity, and all these things that are very valuable. So, I mean, I took this to an extreme as well in the sense that, I ended up doing something very unethical in hiring people to do my homework when I was in college. Why? Because I had gotten a full-time offer from Goldman Sachs, which I did an internship with. I was in my last year of college. I was doing a startup, my previous startup, Vise. It was like a glass store for factory workers in Mexico. I was doing that, working on that. I felt that it was so meaningful. I was learning so much. I was the CTO, leading a team of engineers, just growing tremendously. And then I had a school in the way that was getting in the way. It was like getting these homework assignments that like really didn't feel that valuable. I felt like I was learning way more technically from like actually building the startup. So I made an ethical decision of prioritizing my values for growth and impact over my value for integrity. And I think that was like, in essence, the core mistake that I made in hiring people to like do my homework. I ended up getting caught, got suspended from school for a year. It was really bad. My parents were like, yo, what the fuck? Like, my dad is a doctor and my mom is a microbiologist and professor. So super like high, well-educated people and very high integrity people. So they could not understand like how this happened. I told Goldman Sachs what happened and they were like, yo, like we need to see what we're going to do. 2 weeks later, they rescinded my offer. So I lost the offer. Best of all, I went back home to live with my parents for some time because I had a year off, I guess. And the only thing I had was the thing that sort of got me in trouble in the first place, the startup. And my parents like were, why are you working on this? Like this hasn't gone anywhere, which like true. We didn't really have like meaningful results. And the startup, the only thing I felt like I had, like we had just lost our best engineer. It had been 2 years with no significant traction. It's like everything seemed so great at one point and it just completely crashed the next point. I went on a silent retreat the day I got suspended from my university, and it was really transformative in the sense that I got to reflect deeply about like what had just happened. And there's a lot of things that I learned, but the 2 core things I mentioned, one of them, that the core mistake was that I valued impact and growth so deeply that I gave up my value for integrity, which I think is a very tempting but very dangerous thing to do. It taught me to be like more authentic and true to myself. And the other thing is that I realized, and this is like where all the personal growth that I had done. So I, went to a Tony Robbins seminar when I was a freshman in college, was super transformative, changed so much for me. And this was like the first real big test that I had of like, holy shit, like everything's like downhill. How do we pick ourselves back up? And, I realized at that point that it's like, I can feel sorry for myself and like feel so bad for like what I did and the consequences. But with any new detour you take in life, you have the opportunity to turn whatever path you're on into a golden path, a path of opportunity. And so I realized, wait a second, if I have to go back to school, that means that I can do more internships and I have like way more time to prepare for them as well and like leak code my butt off. And so I did, and leak coded like crazy. I ended up doing like 38 interviews with 19 companies and got rejected from almost all of them, but ended up getting offers from LinkedIn, Meta, Google, and another company.
Almost all of f.inc.
Yeah. It's pretty funny how like most of the normal or like average companies like rejected me, but maybe I prepared better for them by the time I got to them. Did internships with LinkedIn, with Facebook, was exceptional. I was like, Goldman Sachs was cool, but this was like a whole nother level. It was really cool. But what that taught me was that, wow, the only real failure in life is a failure to learn. Because if like you're going to fuck up, especially if you're like a founder or you have like high risk appetite, which I do, which gets me in trouble sometimes, but is kind of like core to my nature. But you're going to fuck up. You're going to fall down. You're going to do stupid shit. You're going to sometimes do things that lack integrity, hopefully not too often. And hopefully you learn from those. But the most important thing to me is to like, is not that thing was a mistake or a failure, but rather that the only real failure is not taking the opportunity, the golden opportunity to learn from those mistakes. So that was a core mindset that I developed, and things I think turned up much better because I approached the whole situation with a growth mindset and looking for the opportunities and growing where I could.
I don't even know what to say after that.
Pretty crazy. Yeah. And then went to Meta. I was there for internship. LinkedIn chose Meta's full-time offer. That brought me out here to the Bay, and I was with them for a whopping like 10 months until I decided to burn my boats and take the quantum leap to become a founder. And that was almost like 2 years ago.
And so, you went through traditional education, you succeeded by, like the standard of you got a job, you got interviews or you got, roles at Facebook, whatever you said, Google, like half a FANG. But then you gave it all up to work on a startup and play a completely different game.
Yeah.
Do you think your education was something or your experience in education was what set you up to do that? Or do you think it held you back longer?
I think it held me back longer because I always felt that I had, to some degree, like more ambition or curiosity than what school was fulfilling for me. I don't know. I felt like there was something more, and I didn't want to wait to like finish college to like start going on this path that I wanted to go on. And so in that sense, school felt like a distraction because it took away time, it took away autonomy. Like fortunately I did find like some cool people that were like-minded in college. I didn't go to like a super crazy good university, like an Ivy League, so there wasn't as many of those people. But overall, like I felt like it detracted value and delayed me in some ways, which I think like is kind of what makes me so like passionate and obsessed about like learning and education, because there's a lot of people like myself that are trapped in the education system. Leonard's another one that feels like this. The engineer that works with us, he's like, he feels trapped.
He's out on Twitter tweeting about like, I had homework this week, I couldn't work on my startup. It's the funniest thing ever.
It's crazy. Yeah, we need, and I love BuildSpace, Farz's company, because of this, because it's like, yes, like create a path for some people that don't want to take the traditional path, right? Like school can be really great for some people, but some people really feel trapped there. So how do you create more autonomy? How do you inspire greater creativity, critical thinking, and all of these things that are so fundamental to us as humans in the education system?
So one thing I was talking to Adam about recently from Third Web is, AI is about to change. And, I think Mark Andreessen tweeted about this too. It's very obvious now, but AI is going to fundamentally change how education works, right? Because now for the first time, you can really, it's like having personalized tutors for literally everyone. And that becomes super useful at a younger age where, now instead of just kind of being thrown into a classroom and forced to learn at the pace of, the people around you, you can actually have a tailored experience that, keeps up with you, moves faster if you're able to move faster, is able to give you more depth into topics that it understands that you're interested in, instead of just throwing you into a curriculum that, to be honest, wasn't really designed to give anyone depth in a certain concept or in a certain topic. And so you've spent a lot of time now researching education, specifically with AI for Wisdolia. Have you seen any companies or have you seen anything interesting kind of emerging in AI education from a literal like systems perspective, from like a process perspective?
Yeah, well, I think one of the most interesting changes in the industry is that historically, like edtech, education technology, has firstly, I think, been about access to quality like learning or education or content, right? So you see like Coursera, LinkedIn Learning, Masterclass, Khan Academy. All of these platforms were really great in the sense that they've created like really good content that are almost like close to free for many of them, and really high quality. That's really great. I feel like that's a really fundamental starting point. But now the problem that almost all of them face is that content's great, but like people lack motivation, or they can be like boring. You take this course and then it's like, what do I do? Like, how do I apply this? Or like, some of them have like assignments on like, great, like, or do this little pop quiz or whatever, but it's like not very engaging. It's not very personalized. It's kind of like boring. And so you face this dilemma in the process of learning of, should I just passively, almost mindlessly consume this content, this information that I'm learning? Or should I actively engage in some form? And if I do actively engage, how do I do it? And how do I make it fun?
I mean, for me, when I tried learning coding for the first time, I would spend time on Coursera just because it felt productive. You know, I spent an hour of learning how to code today, so it was a success or whatever. But then the biggest learnings came from just failing at trying to build my own social app and following these like Indian guys on YouTube as they built Instagram clones. And I think I definitely had a lack of fundamentals, and that showed because I was trying to put TypeScript code and JavaScript code and wondering why it was breaking.
Yep.
Or like putting Python functions inside of like my JavaScript file and like wondering why the whole thing was breaking. But from doing that enough and from spending enough time kind of like, bashing my head against a wall, like not being able to understand why stuff was breaking, I actually learned how to code. And now I'm at a point where it's like I can build something and I'm confident that I can build something end to end and ship it to production and it'll work. But to be honest, the biggest change after that was I went to school. Like I went to Berkeley, I studied computer science, and that's where they filled in the fundamentals of like, here's how data structures work. Yep. Here's what object-oriented programming was. And then once I had that with this like background of kind of understanding, kind of seeing, having built stuff before, then I was able to really learn how to code, and I was able to actually, become not a full stack developer, but I was able to actually, hold my own as far as like I can have a conversation with engineers, I can manage them, and I understand what real timelines look like. I can understand of where complexity would what part of a project is more complex than the other, what can be outsourced to a guy on Upwork. I think that with ChatGPT now, that whole process is streamlined, right? Because I can now, I use Cursor. If I was where I was 3 years ago, I could just go in and say, why isn't this working? And it would be very obvious to an AI that there's Python functions inside of a JavaScript file. Yeah. Whereas Stack Overflow and Google didn't really help me with that. And I think that, now there's like the GPT store. Now we're seeing a bunch of people kind of like building out these like AI co-pilot, AI assistants for any vertical. And I think that mixed with like a roadmap.sh type of website where it's just like a roadmap of everything that you need to learn about like engineering. There's like an interesting mix between the two where it's like once someone figures out how that works, I think education will change forever.
Yeah, definitely. I can provide a little more context on the learning science of like what you went through. That's also helpful, just for like what happens with a lot of people. But basically there's this really interesting framework in learning science called Bloom's taxonomy. It's like a sort of like pyramid with 6 levels. And it kind of talks about like how there's lower order levels of learning and higher order levels of learning. And of course, if you engage in higher order levels of learning, the learning tends to be more effective. But what does it look like? It's like you start at the very bottom with remembering something, like what is the capital of France? Then you go into understanding, like how does supply and demand work? Then it's kind of like applying, like take something you learn, apply it to a different context. Then it's analyzing, which is breaking down, like what's the relationship between a cell and a mitochondria and how much energy it's able to produce. And then evaluate, right? Like, is this marketing plan good? Is it not? Why or why not? You have to like break it down and really analyze it. And then finally at the highest level is what building is. It's creation, right? How do you like create or build like new knowledge? So if you engage at the highest level building, that's really great because it's kind of like you're putting everything you know into action, into something like actually tangible. But you can run into the problem that you run into where it's kind of like I'm building, but I don't even know what I don't know. And my knowledge gaps and my lack of conceptual understanding may limit my understanding to getting to a solution. So so it's hard because you need like both to an extent. But I think when you first build, in most cases, it better contextualizes like what happened with you on when you see the concept. It's like, it gets solidified better because you're like, oh, this is what I could have used when I had that problem that one time. And the more connections you can make between what you're learning and the sort of context of your life, the better that's going to retain in your mind.
And the same thing goes for building a company, right? When you look at what happens in the office, it's like we're starting to see people share playbooks of what worked for their growth, for example. Like there are a few, you, Ara, Alex, kind of doing the influencer strategy, Lexica even, where it's like you guys all took a very similar strategy or a very similar playbook, and you were able to all get results from it. There's the same concept of like the same, you hear versions of the same advice kind of go around, like, oh, don't build in a silo, work on shipping to production. Don't just like features, like don't just stack features, stuff like drive a bunch of traffic to top of funnel before you worry about trying to optimize. And I think that's something you get from being surrounded by other people that are either a few steps behind or a few steps ahead of you that not everyone has access to. And that's where I think AI kind of like fills that gap for the rest of the world. But if you can, or for the general kind of like person that is trying to learn something or trying to build a company specifically, there is huge value in just like the online communities, online Discord groups, in-person communities if they're in SF, where you really do fast track your learning instead of, going through the mistakes and kind of going through the failures that, someone like you had to go through over 4 years. A lot of that they can just learn from and have it condensed into 1 year.
Exactly.
I guess my question to you now to end things off is, if we were to do this podcast in a year, what would you want to have accomplished by then for you to consider this last year a success?
I like to think of my success more in terms of like the, like who I'm becoming and what I'm creating, as well as what processes and systems I've built, like habits, rather than like just the achievements. I think achievements are good, and maybe for that, I'll bank on Alex's same goal of 5 million ARR. But probably more like I try to like reverse engineer that. It's like, okay, we want that, but like, how do we get there? I think one of the most biggest goals that we think can enable that is getting our referral rate to 1, right? And building those viral growth loops. So Wisdolia wise, those are the top 2 that come to mind. Other than that, it's like, what is success? I think it's also like being profitable, which we're not too far away from.
Let's go.
So yeah, we're almost there. What else? Yeah. And then just like having good habits, like waking up at 6:30 a.m. every day, starting to produce music. So having like several tracks out by then. Yeah, I think those are some of the core things, but yeah, that's probably what I would say.
Fire. If you made it till the end, comment, shout out Coursera. We'll see you next week.